For my husband's mistress's baby shower, I offered to organize the gift table myself. Right before she opened the presents, I quietly slipped one more pastel envelope into the pile. The positive DNA test proving the baby was really my millionaire husband's. His mother was recording, expecting to capture my humiliation as the barren wife who couldn't keep her man. Instead, she filmed her future daughter-in-law screaming, my husband's empire collapsing, and me walking away with more than just dignity. My name is Emily Carter, and if you asked anyone in this ballroom 5 minutes ago, they would have told you I was the most pathetic woman in the state of Massachusetts. I walked into the private ballroom of the Willowbrook Country Club, my heels clicking against the polished marble floor with a rhythm that felt deceptively steady. The room smelled of expensive lilies, buttercream frosting, and the specific metallic scent of old money that seems to hang in the air whenever the Hayes family gathers. It was a beautiful room, objectively speaking. The afternoon light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, catching on the crystal centerpieces that lined the long banquet tables. Every surface was draped in heavy cream-colored linen. In the center of the room stood a dessert table shaped entirely like a Victorian baby carriage, overflowing with macarons and artisan chocolates. Hanging above the fireplace in gold foil script that must have cost more than my car was a banner that read, Hayes. It was a celebration of new life. It was a display of obscene wealth, and it was entirely for my husband's mistress. The irony was sharp enough to cut glass. I spent my days designing events for Willow and Thyme, a modest, charming cafe where we celebrated local engagements and 50th birthdays. With handmade garlands and locally sourced wildflowers, I knew how to make a room feel warm on a budget. But this event, I had not planned this. I was merely a guest at a party paid for by my husband, Ethan Hayes, to celebrate the child growing inside the womb of a woman named Ava Brooks. Vivian Hayes, my mother-in-law, was already holding court near the entrance. She wore a structured Chanel suit in a shade of icy blue that matched her eyes, and she was directing the catering staff with the sharp, flicking gestures of a woman who has never cleaned a dish in her life. Her phone was already in her hand, the camera lens pointed outward like a weapon. She was recording everything. She wanted documentation. In Vivian's mind, today was not just a baby shower. It was a public execution of my dignity, and she wanted the footage for the archives. I watched her pan the camera across the room, capturing the guests, the flowers, and finally me. She wanted to capture the image of the barren wife who could not keep her man, the woman who was so desperate to cling to the Hayes surname that she would attend the baby shower of her replacement just to stay in the picture. I adjusted the strap of my handbag and smiled at her. It was a small, tight smile, the kind that does not reach the eyes, but it was enough to confuse her for a split second before she turned back to her friends. "Oh, look, she is so gracious," I heard one of Vivian's friends whisper. It was Mrs. Whitaker, a woman who wore diamonds the size of grapes and had the moral backbone of a chocolate eclair. Gracious is one word for it. Another woman murmured back, sipping her champagne. I would call it desperate. I would have divorced him months ago. But I suppose when you marry up, you tolerate a lot to keep the lifestyle. I kept walking. I let their words wash over me like dirty water. They thought I was here to beg for scraps. They thought I was here because I was weak. They had no idea that the most dangerous person in the room is always the one who has already lost everything, because she has nothing left to lose. I made my way to the gift table. It was already piling up with boxes wrapped in silver and gold paper, towering monuments to the Hayes family legacy. There were boxes from Tiffany, bags from Neiman Marcus, and envelopes that I knew contained checks with 4 or 5 zeros written on the signature line. I was the one who had offered to organize this table. When I suggested it to Vivian a week ago, she looked at me with pity. I thought I was trying to make myself useful, trying to play the role of the supportive sister wife. "Let me handle the details, Vivian," I had said. "You should enjoy the party." And now here I am handling the details. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out a single pastel yellow envelope. It was unassuming. It looked like it might contain a gift card or a sentimental note. I slid it into a neutral gift bag filled with white tissue paper, a bag that did not have a tag on it. I placed it carefully at the back of the pile, arranging the other gifts around it so that it would be the very last thing Ava opened. My heart hammered against my ribs, a slow, heavy thud. This was the point of no return. Once that envelope was in the pile, the fuse was lit. I checked my phone. There were 2 notifications on the lock screen. The first text was from Laura Bennett, my attorney. It was short and professional. "Filing submitted at 9 this morning. The timestamp is recorded. You are clear." The second text was from the private lab I had hired 3 weeks ago under a pseudonym. "Results confirmed, 99.9%. I stared at the words 99.9%. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. A strange calmness settled over me, a cold clarity that felt almost like sedation. It was funny how numbers worked. 6 months ago, numbers were just arithmetic. Now they were ammunition. 99.9% was not just a probability, it was a key. It was the combination to a safe that Vivian Hayes had built to keep me out. A safe that I had just rigged to blow open from the inside. Across the room, the double doors opened and a hush fell over the crowd. Ava Brooks walked in. She was glowing. There was no other word for it. She was wearing a white form-fitting dress that hugged every curve, specifically the high round bump of her stomach. Her hair was a cascade of perfect auburn waves, and her skin looked like it had been polished. She looked like the winner. She looked like the future of the Hayes dynasty. Vivian rushed forward, enveloping Ava in a hug that was more theatrical than affectionate. The camera on Vivian's phone never wavered. She was broadcasting this live to her Instagram stories, to the hundreds of socialites and competitors who watched the Hayes family like hawks. "Look at our beautiful mother-to-be," Vivian announced, her voice shrill with triumph. Ethan was standing near the bar holding a scotch. He looked tired. He wore the expensive navy suit I had picked out for him last Christmas. The one he said made him feel powerful. Now he just looked like a man trying to balance on a tightrope while holding a lit torch. He caught my eye across the room. He didn't smile. He just gave a curt nod. The kind of acknowledgement a CEO gives to a janitor. He thought I was handled. He thought I was managed. He thought that by paying off my car and buying me a new bracelet, he had purchased my silence and my compliance. Ava made her way to the oversized velvet chair set up in front of the gift table. She sat down with a dramatic sigh, resting her hands on her belly. The guests cooed. They surrounded her, offering drinks she couldn't have and compliments she didn't deserve. I stood by the wall. My hands clasped in front of me. I looked like part of the scenery. I looked like the furniture. As Ava reached for the first gift, a large box wrapped in silver foil, I allowed myself to remember the woman I was 6 months ago. That Emily Carter would have been crying in the bathroom right now. Emily Carter would have been begging Ethan to come home, asking what she had done wrong, wondering if she wasn't pretty enough or smart enough or rich enough to keep him. That Emily Carter believed in vows and loyalty and the sanctity of marriage. But Vivian and Ethan had killed that woman. They had crushed her under the weight of their expectations and their cruelty. I remembered the day Vivian told me, with a smile on her face, that Ethan needed a woman who could provide a legacy, implying that my inability to conceive in the first 2 years of marriage was a moral failing rather than a biological roll of the dice. I remembered how she had tried to humiliate me at the charity gala, introducing me as Ethan's little helper rather than his wife. Before this envelope made Ava scream, Vivian tried to annihilate me in public first. She taught me how revenge works. She taught me that in this world, the truth does not matter as much as the evidence. She taught me that if you want to win, you do not scream and you do not fight. You smile, you organize the party, you wrap the bomb in pastel paper, and you wait for them to pull the pin. I watched Ava tear the paper off the first gift. It was a cashmere blanket. "Oh, it is beautiful," she squealed, holding it up for the cameras. Vivian beamed. Ethan took a sip of his scotch. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of lilies and impending destruction. I just improved her design. To understand why I stood in that country club ballroom with ice in my veins instead of tears in my eyes, you have to understand how the Hayes family breaks a person. They do not do it all at once. They do not snap your bones or shout in your face. They erode you. They are like water dripping on a stone, wearing you down drop by drop, day by day, until you look in the mirror and realize the person you used to be has been washed away completely. It started 5 years ago. I was 23 years old, and I was invisible. I was working as the lead floral assistant for a charity gala at the downtown convention center. It was a black tie event to raise money for an art museum I could not afford to visit. My hands were stained green from chlorophyll, and I had a smudge of dirt on my cheek that I did not know about until much later. I was trying to fix a collapsing hydrangea arrangement on table 4 when a man in a tuxedo stopped next to me. He handed me a napkin. "You have a little war paint on your cheek," he said. That was Ethan. He was charming in a way that felt dangerous, like standing too close to a ledge. He told me he worked for a firm called Hayes Capital Ventures, but he said it with a shrug, as if it were just a small shop he ran out of his garage. He claimed he was self-made, that he understood the value of hard work because his father had been tough on him. He looked at my calloused hands and told me they were beautiful because they created things. For a girl who was working double shifts at Willow and Thyme, a neighborhood cafe and event space, hearing a man in a $3,000 suit tell me that my labor was noble felt like a drug. I fell in love with him in 3 months. It was a whirlwind, the kind of romance that makes you ignore the warning signs, because the destination looked so pretty. But while I was falling in love with Ethan, I was crashing headfirst into the concrete wall that was Vivian Hayes. The first time I met her was at a brunch at their estate in Newton. I wore my best dress, a floral print I had bought on sale at Macy's. I thought I looked nice. Vivian took one look at me, scanned me from my shoes to my hairline, and turned to her son. "Is this the catering help, Ethan?" she asked. Her voice was light, airy, and lethal. When Ethan corrected her, explaining that I was his girlfriend, she did not apologize. She simply took a sip of her mimosa and said, "Oh, I see you are experimenting. That is fine, darling. Everyone has a rebellious phase. Just do not let it drag on too long." She openly referred to me as service staff whenever I was out of earshot, or at least whenever she thought I was out of earshot. I remember hearing her tell a neighbor that Ethan was dating beneath his league, as if he were a Premier League athlete and I were playing district-level ball. She treated my job at Willow and Thyme not as a career, but as a quaint, slightly embarrassing habit, like biting one's fingernails. When Ethan proposed 6 months later, Vivian did not congratulate us. She asked if I was pregnant. When we said no, she asked if Ethan had suffered a head injury. Our wedding was the first real battleground. I wanted something small, intimate, maybe in a garden with string lights and acoustic music. Vivian wanted a coronation. She hijacked the planning within weeks, insisting that the Hayes name required a certain standard of presentation. We compromised, which in the Hayes family dictionary means Vivian got exactly what she wanted, and I was allowed to choose the flavor of the cake. But the true humiliation was the guest list. Vivian reviewed my list of invitees, my family, my friends from the cafe, my cousins from Indiana, and wrinkled her nose as if she smelled something rotting. "This is simply too blue-collar, Emily," she said, crossing out names with a red pen. "We cannot have a room full of people who look like they just clocked out of a shift. It ruins the aesthetic." I fought her on it. I cried. I begged Ethan to step in. He held me, kissed my forehead, and told me that his mother was just particular, that she wanted everything to be perfect for us. He made me feel like I was the one being unreasonable for wanting my aunt and uncle to be treated with dignity. In the end, my family was invited, but Vivian arranged the seating chart with military precision. My parents, my siblings, and my friends were all seated at tables 19 and 20. These tables were located in the far back corner of the reception hall, directly next to the swinging doors of the kitchen. Every time a waiter walked out with a tray of steak, the door would swing open and hit the back of my father's chair. I sat at the head table next to my new husband, watching my mother try to eat her dinner while waiters brushed past her elbows. Vivian sat across from me, raising her glass of champagne in a silent toast. She had segregated my life from hers within the same room. For the first year of our marriage, I told myself it would get better. I told myself that once I proved I was a good wife, they would respect me. I started overcompensating. I took extra shifts at Willow and Thyme. Not because we needed the money. Ethan made more in a bonus check than I made in a year, but because I wanted to prove I was not a gold digger. I wanted to show them I had my own drive. Ethan, for his part, mastered the art of the backhanded compliment. He would come home and ask about my day, and when I told him about a difficult client or a successful event setup, he would smile that indulgent, patronizing smile. "You work so hard, Em," he would say, loosening his tie. "You have such a great work ethic. It is almost a waste to see you running yourself ragged for a cafe. You are too good for that place. You know, I can support us. You do not have to play waitress anymore." It sounded supportive, It sounded like he wanted to take care of me, but the subtext was clear. He was ashamed of what I did. He did not see me as an event coordinator or a manager. He saw me as help. He wanted a wife who lunched, a wife who chaired committees, not a wife who came home smelling of espresso and vanilla syrup. Sunday dinners became a ritual of torture. We would sit at Vivian's long mahogany table, eating food prepared by her private chef, and she would begin the interrogation. "So, Emily," she would say, cutting her filet mignon into perfect squares, "are you still working at that little shop? What is it called again? Bread and butter?" "Willow and thyme," I would say, keeping my voice steady. "And yes, we actually just booked 3 weddings for next month." Vivian would laugh, a short, dry sound. "Weddings. That is sweet. It is nice that you have a hobby to keep you busy until you are ready to step into a real role. A role that reflects the Hayes name." "What role is that, Vivian?" I asked once, foolishly brave. "The role of a mother," she snapped back, her eyes flashing. "The role of a woman who builds a home, not one who serves others in someone else's." I looked at Ethan, waiting for him to defend me, waiting for him to say that my work mattered, that I was building a business, that I was happy. Ethan just took a sip of his wine and said, "Mom is right, Em. You do seem tired lately. Maybe you should scale back. We do not need the extra $2,000 a month that badly." That was the moment I felt the shift. He had reduced my entire career, my passion, the thing that made me feel like myself, to a dollar amount, $2,000. To him, it was a rounding error. To me, it was my independence. As the years went on, Ethan's career skyrocketed. He was featured in Forbes. He was interviewed on business podcasts. He cultivated an image of the disciplined, morally upright entrepreneur, the family man who built an empire on integrity. He traveled constantly, 3 days in Chicago, 4 days in London, a week in Tokyo. Vivian beamed with pride. She carried copies of the magazines featuring him in her purse. She used his success as a yardstick to measure my failures. "Look at what he is building," she would whisper to me at parties while Ethan charmed a circle of investors. "He is a king, and every king needs a queen, Emily, not a servant." I tried to change. I tried to dress the way they wanted. I bought neutral tones, silk scarves, and understated jewelry. I learned to discuss the stock market and interest rates. I stopped talking about my work at the cafe. I became quiet. I became a shadow, but it was never enough. I was tolerated, but I was never accepted. I was a placeholder. I could see it in the way Vivian looked at me when she thought I wasn't looking. She was waiting. She was waiting for me to slip up, for me to fade away, for Ethan to realize that he had bought a starter home and was ready for the mansion. I felt the distance growing in my marriage, a physical widening of the space between us in bed. Ethan stopped touching me. He stopped asking about my day. He started locking his phone. He started coming home smelling of hotel soap and unfamiliar perfume, dismissing my questions with a wave of his hand, telling me I was being paranoid, that client dinners ran late, that business was demanding. I did not know then that he was already auditioning my replacement. I did not know that while I was at home reading books on how to be a better society wife, he was out finding a woman who fit the mold Vivian had cast. But looking back, I realized the stage was set long before Ava Brooks ever walked into his office. The Hayes family had spent 5 years hollowing me out, scraping away my confidence and my identity, preparing me for the slaughter. They thought they had turned me into a victim. They thought they had broken me down into nothing. They forgot one thing. When you scrape away everything a person has, you do not just leave them empty. You leave them with nothing to lose. And a woman with nothing to lose is the most dangerous creature on earth. The digital buzzing of my phone used to be a sound I associated with work orders or texts from friends. But 6 months ago, it became the sound of a bell ringing for the start of a boxing match, where I was the only one not wearing gloves. It started with the group chat. It was titled Hayes Family Updates, a name that suggested warmth and connection, but in reality, it was a curated feed of psychological warfare. My mother-in-law, Vivian, and Ethan's younger sister, Sophia, treated the chat like a bulletin board for my inadequacies. One Tuesday morning, while I was steaming linens for a wedding at the cafe, my phone pinged. It was a link from Vivian. The article was titled The Art of the High-Value Wife: How to Cultivate Grace and Support Your Husband's Ambitions. Underneath the link, Vivian had written, "Saw this and thought of you, Emily. Such wonderful tips on how to prioritize the household over distracting hobbies." Inspiring read. A moment later, Sophia chimed in with a heart emoji. "Totally. It is all about understanding that his time is more expensive than yours. Love this." I remember staring at the screen, the steam from the iron dampening my hairline. They were not even subtle anymore. They were tagging me in instructions on how to be a better accessory. I wanted to type back. I meant to say that my distracting hobby had just built $15,000 in revenue last month, but I didn't. I typed back, "Thanks for sharing, Vivian. Looks interesting." That was the erosion. It was the slow chipping away of my voice until I was thanking people for insulting me. The humiliation moved from our phones to the dinner table. Ethan had started dragging me to more business dinners, claiming it was good for his image to appear settled. But at these dinners, I was not a partner. I was a prop. We sat at a steakhouse in downtown Boston, surrounded by men in dark suits who smelled of cigars and ambition. Ethan was in his element, laughing, pouring wine, commanding the space. When the conversation turned to introductions, he would gesture to me with a vague, dismissive hand. "And this is my wife, Emily," he would say. "She does creative stuff, floral arrangements, party favors, that sort of thing." He made it sound like I glued macaroni to paper plates. He never mentioned I managed a staff of 6 or negotiated contracts with vendors before I could correct him. Vivian, who often joined these dinners to supervise the family brand, would swoop in. "Oh, let us not bore these gentlemen with table settings," she would say, flashing a tight smile. "Ethan, tell them about the acquisition in Boston. And Sophia, darling, tell them about your fellowship application." The spotlight would swing away from me instantly. I would sit there cutting my steak into tiny, manageable pieces, listening to them talk about equity and market shares, feeling like a ghost at my own table. I became an expert in nodding. I learned to smile without showing teeth. I learned to shrink until I took up as little space as possible. Then came the schedule changes. Ethan had always worked long hours. That was the nature of his industry. But the hours shifted. He started missing dinner. Then he started missing the late news. He would roll in at 11 at night, his tie undone, his eyes glassy. "Meeting investors," he would say, walking past me to the refrigerator. He smelled different. It was subtle at first. He used to smell like the cedarwood cologne I bought him and the crisp starch of his shirts. Now he smelled like hotel soap. That generic, chemically floral scent that clings to your skin after a shower in a guest room. Sometimes beneath the soap, there was something else, a sweetness, a perfume that was sharper and more floral than anything I wore. One night, as he tossed his jacket onto the chair, I picked it up to hang it in the closet. The scent hit me. Jasmine and vanilla. "Ethan," I said, holding the jacket, "you smell like perfume." He didn't even turn around. He was pouring a glass of water, his back to me. "We were at a crowded lounge, Emily," he said, his voice flat. "It is a client environment. You are packed in like sardines. Someone probably bumped into me. Do not be dramatic." Client environments. That became the catch-all excuse. Lipstick smudge, client environment. Glitter on his collar, client environment. Coming home at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday, client environment. He started guarding his phone like it contained nuclear codes. For years, his passcode had been his birthday. One morning, I tried to open his phone to check the weather while mine was charging, and it locked me out. He had changed the code. When I asked him about it, he snapped, "I have sensitive client data on there now, Emily. Compliance rules. You cannot just snoop around my device." He started taking calls on the balcony. I would watch him through the sliding glass door. He would stand out there in the freezing cold, shivering in his dress shirt just to ensure I could not hear a word he was saying. He would hunch his shoulders, his voice dropped to a murmur, his face illuminated by the glow of the screen. He looked intimate. He looked engaged. He looked like the man who used to talk to me until 3 in the morning, except now he was giving that energy to a ghost on the other end of the line. Vivian, sensing the cracks in the foundation, brought out the sledgehammer. Her obsession with the Hayes legacy reached a fever pitch every time I saw her. Her eyes went immediately to my stomach. It was a physical inspection. She would scan my midsection looking for a curve, and when she saw nothing but my flat stomach, her disappointment was palpable. At a Sunday brunch just 3 months before the explosion, she decided to twist the knife. We were eating eggs Benedict on the patio. Vivian took a sip of her tea and set the cup down with a deliberate clatter. "I ran into Rebecca yesterday." She said Rebecca was Ethan's college girlfriend, the one who got away, the one who came from a family that owned half of Vermont. "Oh," Ethan said, looking up from his phone. "How is she?" "She is wonderful," Vivian gushed. "She just had her second baby, a boy. They named him William after her father. She looks incredible too." Bounced right back. She turned her gaze to me. It was a heavy, pitying look. "Some women just take naturally to family life." She sighed. "It is a biological talent, really. Not everyone has it. You know, Ethan, Rebecca always did say she wanted a big family. It is a shame how things work out. Not every woman can give a man the legacy he deserves." I felt the blood drain from my face. It was a direct shot. She was telling me I was broken. She was telling my husband he had made a mistake. I looked at Ethan, begging him with my eyes to say something, to say that we were happy, to say that we were trying, to say that I was enough. Ethan just chewed his food and said, "That is nice for Rebecca, Mom." He didn't defend me. He didn't even look at me that afternoon. I went to a stationery store and bought a small black planner. I didn't buy it for work. I didn't buy it for recipes. I bought it to save my sanity. I started tracking him. I created a system. On the left side of the page, I wrote down what Ethan told me he was doing. Tuesday dinner with the Japanese investors. 7. On the right side, I wrote down what I observed. Tuesday. Came home at midnight. Smelled like jasmine perfume. The phone turned face down on the nightstand. No receipt from dinner in pockets. I started noticing the mismatches. He would say he was at the office downtown, but the shared location on our car's navigation app, which I don't think he knew how to disable, showed the vehicle parked at a residential complex in Cambridge for 3 hours. He would say he was in meetings all day, but his calendar alerts, which synced to our home iPad, showed blocks of empty time labeled simply as personal. The evidence was piling up in black ink, but my brain refused to process it. I was in denial. I was gaslighting myself before he even had the chance. Maybe he's planning a surprise for me, I told myself. Maybe he is stressed. Maybe I'm just being crazy. My confidence was eroding. I looked in the mirror and saw what Vivian wanted me to see. I saw a woman who was aging. I saw a woman who wasn't rich enough, who wasn't sophisticated enough, who couldn't give her husband a child. I started to believe that I was the problem. If I just dressed better, if I just worked less, if I just smiled more, maybe he would come back from the balcony. One night, the pressure became too much. Ethan was in the bathroom showering off the client environment, and his phone lit up on the nightstand. It was a text, no name, just a number. Can't wait for tomorrow. I felt like I had been punched in the throat. When he came out of the bathroom, drying his hair with a towel, I confronted him. I was shaking. I was crying. I hated myself for crying. Ethan, who is texting you? I asked, my voice cracking. Who can't wait for tomorrow? He stopped. He looked at the phone, then at me. His face didn't show guilt. It showed annoyance. He looked at me like I was a child, throwing a tantrum over a broken toy. He sighed, a long, exhausted sound. Are we doing this again, Emily? Yes, we are, I said. You are never home. You hide your phone. You smell like her. Whoever she is, Ethan, please just tell me the truth. He walked over to me. He didn't hug me. He put his hands on my shoulders and looked me in the eye with a terrifying calmness. You are paranoid because you are stressed, he said. You are working too hard at that cafe, and it is making you crazy. My mother is just old-fashioned, and you are letting her get in your head. Stop making drama out of nothing. That text was from the contractor for the new office build. We are breaking ground tomorrow. He lied so easily. He lied with the smooth confidence of a man who believes his own narrative. You need to relax, Em, he said, kissing me on the forehead. It was a cold, empty kiss. You are sounding hysterical, and frankly, it is not attractive. He turned off the light and went to sleep. I lay awake in the dark, listening to his breathing. I clutched the black planner to my chest. I knew he was lying. I knew it in my gut. But in that moment, lying there in the dark, I felt smaller than I had ever felt in my life. I was the crazy wife. I was the barren woman. I was the hysterical burden. I didn't know then that the text wasn't from a contractor. I didn't know that tomorrow was the day he was signing the lease on an apartment for Ava Brooks. All I knew was that I was drowning, and the two people who were supposed to be my family were the ones holding my head under the water. The crash of a ceramic mug shattering against the floor tile was the only thing that pulled me out of the trance. I was standing behind the counter at Willow and Thyme, wiping down the espresso machine. It was a Tuesday afternoon, usually the quietest time of the week, but two women were sitting at a corner table near the window. They were regulars, Mrs. Harrington and Mrs. Langley. The kind of women who wore tennis skirts but never played tennis, and whose voices carried across the room like a radio broadcast. I had been tuning them out, focused on the rhythmic hiss of the steam wand, until I heard my husband's name. Ethan Hayes, Mrs. Harrington said, leaning in over her latte. I am telling you it was him. We saw them at the Pinnacle on Friday night. Mrs. Langley gasped, a theatrical sound. With who? His wife. That is the thing. Mrs. Harrington lowered her voice, but in the empty cafe, it echoed like a shout. Definitely not his wife. It was a redhead. Stunning. I will give him that. But darling, she was very pregnant, and they looked very cozy. He had his hand on her back the whole time they were walking to the elevator. The world stopped. The rag dropped from my hand. Pregnant. The word detonated in my chest. It hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the wind out of my lungs. My vision blurred at the edges. I stood frozen, staring at the white ceramic shards of the mug I had just knocked over, unable to move my feet. Friday night, Ethan had told me he was working late at the office. He had texted me at 8 saying he was ordering takeout and grinding through a merger document. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my phone. I pulled up the shared location history, the one feature on our family plan he had forgotten to disable in his newfound obsession with privacy. I scrolled back to Friday. There it was, the blue dot. It was not at the Hayes Capital Ventures office tower. It was at the Pinnacle, a rooftop lounge 3 miles away. He had been there for 3 hours. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me, hot and acidic. I ran to the employee restroom, barely making it to the sink before I dry heaved. There was nothing in my stomach but coffee and fear. I splashed cold water on my face, staring at the woman in the mirror. She looked pale. She looked terrified. She looked like a fool. For the next 3 days, I walked through my life like a zombie. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed next to Ethan, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, wondering how a person could lie so still when they were living a lie so loud. Then came the summons. Vivian called on Saturday morning. Her voice was crisp, efficient. Come for brunch tomorrow, Emily. Just family. We need to discuss some complicated news. I knew the moment she said complicated. I knew the Hayes estate was beautiful that Sunday, bathed in golden spring light. The table was set on the terrace overlooking the manicured gardens. There was fresh fruit, smoked salmon, and a pitcher of Bloody Marys. It looked like a scene from a magazine, perfect and bloodless. Ethan wouldn't look at me. He sat staring at his plate, pushing a piece of melon around with his fork. Vivian sat at the head of the table, her posture erect, her face composed. Eat, Emily, she commanded gently. You look peaky. I cannot eat, Vivian, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow and metallic. What is the news? Vivian sighed, dabbing her mouth with a linen napkin. She looked at Ethan. Go on, Ethan, be a man. Ethan finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked miserable, but not the misery of remorse. It was the misery of a man who had been caught. Emily, he started, then cleared his throat. I have been seeing someone. I stared at him. I waited for the rest, and he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. She is pregnant. The air left the terrace. The birds stopped singing. The only sound was the roaring of blood in my ears. You are joking, I whispered. Please tell me this is a sick joke. It is not a joke, Vivian cut in smoothly. She took a sip of her drink, But let us not overreact. These things happen, Emily. Men are under a lot of pressure. Sometimes judgment lapses. Lapses, I choked out. A lapse is forgetting to take out the trash. A lapse is not creating a human being with another woman. Vivian held up a hand. Lower your voice. The neighbors. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. The woman's name is Ava, Ethan mumbled. She is a marketing consultant. I met her on the Archer project. Is it yours? I asked. The question tasted like ash. She says it is, Ethan said quickly. But nothing is proven yet. We have to wait for the test. It could be anyone's. She comes from a less stable background. She is very emotional. Vivian nodded in agreement. Exactly. She is a bit of a gold digger, if you ask me. But we have to be prepared for all outcomes. I stood up so fast my chair scraped, screeching against the stone patio. Prepared? I shouted. You are talking about a baby, Ethan. You are talking about destroying our marriage. I ran to the bathroom off the main hall. I locked the door and sank to the floor. I vomited into the toilet, my body expelling the shock in violent spasms. I shook uncontrollably, my teeth chattering as if I were freezing to death. I sat there for 20 minutes, hugging my knees, rocking back and forth. I wanted my mom. I wanted to be back in my small apartment in Indiana. I wanted to be anywhere but in this mansion that felt like a tomb. When I finally came out, washed and pale, they were still sitting on the terrace. They hadn't even moved. I walked up to Ethan. I grabbed his arm. Ethan, please, I begged, ignoring Vivian. We can fix this, but you have to cut her off. If the baby is yours, we will support it financially. But you cannot be with her. You have to choose right now. Me or her? Ethan looked at Vivian. He looked at his mother for permission to speak to his wife. Emily, he said, pulling his arm away gently. It is not that simple. If the baby is mine, I have a responsibility. You have a responsibility to me, I screamed. I am your wife. Vivian stood up. Then she walked over to me and placed a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy and cold. Stop being selfish, Emily, she said. Her voice was low and dangerous. You still have the ring on your finger. You still have the Hayes name. You live in a house worth $3 million. Do not throw a tantrum just because the road got a little bumpy. She squeezed my shoulder hard. Focus on the bigger picture, dear. Not every woman gets to live this life. You can either be the gracious wife who stood by her husband during a difficult time, or you can be the bitter ex-wife who walked away with nothing. The choice is yours. I drove home in silence. I didn't pack my bags. I didn't leave. Vivian was right about one thing. I was trapped. I had nowhere to go. No assets of my own that weren't tied to Ethan, and a heart that was shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. But the final blow was yet to come. A week later, I was looking for a tax document on the home computer. Ethan had left his email open. I knew I shouldn't look. I knew it would only hurt, but I couldn't stop myself. I typed Ava into the search bar. A thread popped up, dozens of emails. The subject line of the most recent one read, "Settling in." I clicked it. Ethan, the apartment is perfect. The view of the river is stunning. Thank you for arranging the movers. I feel so much safer here than at my old place. The baby is kicking like crazy today. Can you come over tonight? I need you, love A. I scrolled down to Ethan's reply. Glad you like it. I put the deposit and the first 6 months of rent on the company card under consulting fees, so you do not have to worry about bills. I will try to swing by after I deal with things at home. See you soon. He wasn't waiting for a test. He wasn't unsure. He was setting her up. He was building a second home, a parallel life paid for by the company, while I sat in our house wondering if I was enough. 6 months of rent, 6 months. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling the last shred of hope dissolve. He wasn't confused. He was calculating. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was Vivian. "Emily, darling," the text read. "I have been thinking since the situation with Ava is proceeding, and the child is innocent in all this. We need to do the right thing. I am organizing a small shower for her, for the sake of the child. It would look very bad if the family was not united." I stared at the words, unable to comprehend the cruelty. A second text came through. "I assume you will be mature enough to attend. It would mean a lot to Ethan to see you accepting the future." Something snapped in my brain. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet click of a lock turning. Mature enough. She wanted me to attend the baby shower of the woman sleeping with my husband. She wanted me to smile and clap while they celebrated the proof of his betrayal. She thought she could break me. She thought she could humiliate me into submission. I looked at the email on the screen, consulting fees, company card. I looked at Vivian's text, mature enough. I wiped my face. I didn't cry this time. The tears were gone. In their place was something cold, hard, and incredibly sharp. I picked up my phone and typed back. "Of course, Vivian, I would love to come. In fact, let me help you organize it." I hit send. If they wanted me to be part of the show, I would be. But they had no idea that I was about to rewrite the ending. I broke down on a Wednesday. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a scream. It was a quiet, pathetic slide down the wall of the storage closet at Willow and Thyme. I was holding a box of paper napkins, and suddenly the weight of them felt unbearable. I sank to the floor, surrounded by the smell of cardboard and bleach, and just put my head in my hands. Rachel, the owner of the cafe, and the closest thing I had to a friend outside of the haze bubble, found me 5 minutes later. She didn't ask what was wrong. She knew. Everyone knew. The gossip about Ethan was spreading through our small town like a virus. She sat down next to me on the cold linoleum. "Emily," she said gently, taking the box of napkins from my lap, "you cannot keep doing this. You are going to disappear if you let them eat you alive." "I cannot leave him, Rachel," I whispered. "I have nothing. Vivian made sure of that. The house, the cars, the accounts, it is all in his name. If I leave, I am sleeping on my parents' couch in Indiana by Friday." Rachel looked at me, her eyes hard. "Then maybe you do not leave yet. Maybe you plan." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a business card. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock. "One of our regulars, Mrs. Kensington, gave me this. She said she went through a nasty divorce last year. She said this woman is a shark in a Chanel suit. Talk to her. Just talk to her before you agree to anything that woman and her son decide for you." The name on the card was Laura Bennett, attorney at law, family law, asset protection. I stared at the card. It felt heavy in my hand. It felt like a weapon I didn't know how to use. 2 days later, I was sitting in Laura Bennett's office. It was a sleek, modern space with a view of the city skyline. A view that felt a million miles away from the suffocating velvet drapes of the Hayes estate. Laura was a woman in her 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a haircut that meant business. She listened to my story without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished explaining about the baby, the apartment paid for by the company, And Vivian's demands, she didn't offer pity. She offered strategy. "Do you have a copy of your prenuptial agreement?" she asked. I nodded, pulling a thick envelope from my bag. "I signed it 5 years ago," I said, feeling the shame rise in my throat. "I barely read it. I was in love." Vivian said it was standard procedure to protect family assets. I just wanted to marry him. Laura took the document and put on her reading glasses. She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. The room was silent for a long time, save for the ticking of a clock on the wall. Suddenly, she stopped. Her finger tapped a paragraph on page 14. She looked up at me, and a slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. "Emily," she said softly, "did you know about the infidelity clause?" I blinked. No, Vivian said the prenup was just to keep the Hayes Capital Ventures stock in the bloodline. Laura laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound. Vivian Hayes was so obsessed with protecting her son from gold diggers that she overcorrected. She was terrified that you would cheat on him and try to pass off another man's child as a Hayes heir. So she insisted on a rigid paternity clause. She turned the document around and pointed to the text. "Look here, Section 8, Paragraph C. In the event of dissolution of marriage due to proven infidelity resulting in the birth of a child outside of the marital union, where paternity is confirmed by DNA evidence, the spouse, that is you, Emily, is entitled to an immediate lump sum payment of $5 million plus 20% of the husband's vested stock options in Hayes Capital Ventures as a penalty for breach of marital contract and reputational damage." I stared at the words. They swam before my eyes. "Wait," I said, my voice trembling. "You mean if Ethan has a baby with Ava?" "If Ethan has a baby with Ava," Laura corrected, "and we can prove it is his with a DNA test, he essentially hands you the keys to the kingdom. Vivian wrote this to destroy you if you cheated. She never imagined her precious boy would be the one to trigger it." She leaned back in her chair, taking off her glasses. "You said Vivian is paranoid about reputation," she asked. "Obsessed," I said. "And Ethan's father, Edward, he controls the family trust. He is old school. If there is a public scandal, he cuts people off." Laura nodded. "Excellent. That gives us leverage. Here is what we need to do. We need proof, not rumors, not a baby bump. We need documentation." She started listing things on her fingers. 1, financial records, showing he is supporting this woman. The apartment rental is a good start. Get me the receipts. 2, communications, emails, texts, anything where he acknowledges the relationship or the pregnancy. 3, the DNA test. "The DNA test," I repeated. "But Vivian said they are handling it privately." "Of course they are," Laura said. "They want to control the narrative. If the test is negative, they will pay the girl to go away. If it is positive, well, they will probably try to bury it or pressure you into a quiet settlement before you realize what this clause is worth." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. "You need to find out when and where that test is happening, Emily. And you need to get your hands on the results before they do, or at the very least at the same time." I left her office, feeling a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't hope exactly. It was, adrenaline. That night, I went home to the empty house. Ethan was working late again, which I now knew meant he was at the Harborview apartment with Ava. Vivian was in the library talking on the phone. The door was slightly ajar. I stopped in the hallway holding my breath. "No, Edward does not need to know yet," Vivian was saying, her voice low and urgent. We will handle the paternity test privately. I have arranged for a mobile phlebotomist to go to the apartment next week. She paused, listening to the person on the other end. If it is not his, we spin it, she said. We say she was a stalker, a troubled woman. We threaten legal action and she disappears. But if it is his, she sighed, a sound of pure annoyance. If it is his, we structure things so she, meaning Emily, walks away with as little as possible. We offer her a flat settlement to leave quietly. We tell her the prenup leaves her with nothing. She is naive, Arthur. She has never read that document. She will believe whatever we tell her. I stood there in the hallway, my hand hovering over the door handle. She is naive. She will believe whatever we tell her. For 5 years, those words would have crushed me. They would have sent me running to my room to cry into my pillow. But tonight, standing in the shadows of the house that wasn't mine, listening to the woman who hated me plot my financial demise, I felt something else. I felt the click of the lock again. I didn't barge in. I didn't scream. I quietly backed away, stepping softly on the expensive Persian rug, and went upstairs to our bedroom. I sat down at my vanity and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked the same as I did yesterday. Same brown hair, same tired eyes. But the woman looking back at me was different. Vivian had spent years teaching me that I wasn't a haze. She had taught me that I was an outsider, a guest who had overstayed her welcome. She thought that made me weak, but she forgot one thing. Guests see things. Guests notice where the bodies are buried. And guests, unlike family, have no obligation to keep the secrets. I picked up my phone and texted Laura. I know when the test is happening, I'm going to get the results. I set the phone down and smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. If they wanted to weaponize paperwork, I would learn to fire back. I would use their own signatures, their own money, and their own obsession with bloodlines to burn their house down. And I would do it all while smiling, just like Vivian taught me. The first step was money. It always is. Laura had been very specific about how to handle this phase. She called it insulating the asset, but I called it building a lifeboat. Under her guidance, I drove 2 towns over to a bank, where the Hayes family had no influence and no friends on the board of directors. I opened a checking account in my maiden name with the $500 I had stashed in a shoebox from my tips at Willow and Thyme. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It was the first money I had touched in $5, years that didn't come with strings attached to Ethan's approval. Next came data mining. This part felt like I was living in a spy novel, but the reality was far more mundane and sickening. It involved sitting at my laptop at 2 a.m, drinking cold coffee, and sifting through digital debris. I forwarded bank statements to a secure email address Laura had set up for me. I downloaded credit card bills that showed charges for consulting services that matched the dates of Ethan's late nights at the office. The worst part was the email thread I found archived in a folder named Project Alpha. It wasn't a project, it was a correspondence with Ava. I read an email from 2 months ago. Ethan had written, "I know the timing is not ideal, babe, but you are our future. Once I untangle the finances with Emily, we can stop hiding. You and the baby are the priority now, our future." He was still sleeping in my bed when he wrote that. He was still eating the dinner I cooked when he typed those words. I didn't cry. I didn't have any tears left. I simply hit print to PDF and saved the file. Every lie he told was another brick in the wall I was building to crush him. But we needed the smoking gun. We needed the DNA. Through the digital paper trail, I found a charge for a private medical concierge service called Summit Ancestry. It was expensive, $3,000 for an expedited discreet paternity test, the kind used by politicians and celebrities who needed answers without records. I decided to play the part Ethan had assigned me for years, the helpful invisible assistant. I waited until Ethan was in the shower one morning. I picked up his phone. He had left it unlocked on the charger for the first time in weeks, likely because he felt safe now that the secret was out, and scrolled to his recent calls. I found the number for Summit. I went out to the garden where the reception was best and the privacy was guaranteed. I dialed the number, pitching my voice to be brisk, professional, and slightly bored. Summit Ancestry, how may I direct your call? A smooth female voice answered. Hi, this is Claire calling from Mr. Ethan Hayes's office, I said. I am just following up on the file number ending in 452. Mr. Hayes is asking about the delivery timeline for the results. He is quite anxious to get this settled. There was a pause. I could hear typing on the other end. One moment, Claire. Yes, the Hayes file. The sample was collected from the apartment on Tuesday. Correct. Yes, that is correct, I said, writing Tuesday, an apartment in my notebook. Okay, it looks like the lab is prioritizing this. We expect the final report to be uploaded to the client portal within 48 hours. An email notification will be sent to Mr. Hayes directly. Perfect, I said. And just to confirm, will a physical copy be mailed? No, per Mr. Hayes's request. This is digital only to ensure privacy. Excellent, thank you. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. I felt a surge of power. I knew the timeline, 48 hours. While I was sharpening my knives in the shadows, Vivian decided to twist the blade in the open. She invited me to lunch at the club on a Thursday. She ordered a Cobb salad and looked at me with that pitying, shark-like smile. Emily, she began, placing a hand on my forearm. I wanted to talk to you about the shower on Saturday. I kept my face blank. The shower, yes, Vivian continued. I know this is unconventional, but Ava has no family here. She is terrified. And frankly, it would send such a strong message if you were involved. It would show everyone how big your heart is. It would show that the Hayes family handles its complications with grace. She didn't want to show my heart. She wanted to show my submission. She wanted me there as a prop, a silent endorsement of her son's affair, proving that I was too weak to leave. I took a sip of my iced tea. I thought about the clause in the prenup. I thought about the $5 million. I thought about the stock options. I would love to help, Vivian, I said. She blinked, surprised. She had expected resistance. She had expected tears. Really? She asked. Yes, I said, smiling. You are right. The child is innocent, and I want to show Ethan that I can be mature about this. Vivian relaxed, leaning back in her chair. I am so relieved, Emily. I knew you would see reason. I was wondering, I continued, keeping my voice casual. Since you have the catering and the decor handled, could I take care of the smaller details, the guest list management, the party favors? Maybe the gift table organization? I used to do this professionally. After all, it would make me feel useful. Vivian waved a hand dismissively. Oh, fine, if that makes you feel better. Just make sure the stationery is elegant, nothing cheap. I will handle it personally, I promised. I went home and immediately called Laura. I am in, I told her. I am running the gift table. Good, Laura said. That is your stage. Now we just need the script. Any word on the test? It is coming tomorrow, I said. Friday evening was tense. Ethan was home, which was rare. He was pacing the living room, checking his email every 30 seconds. He was nervous. He knew the results were due. I cooked dinner, roast chicken, his favorite, and acted like everything was normal. I asked him about his day. I poured him a glass of wine. I played the role of the oblivious, trying to make it work wife so perfectly that he actually relaxed. He drank 3 glasses of wine. He started talking about the pressure he was under, casting himself as the victim. You know, Em, he said, slurring slightly, I never wanted to hurt you. This just happened. Ava understands me in a way that is different, but I want to make sure you are taken care of. I am sure you do, Ethan, I said soothingly. Around 9, he got up to use the restroom. He left his laptop open on the kitchen island. This was it. I waited until I heard the bathroom door click shut. Then I moved. I slid across the kitchen floor, in my socks, silent as a ghost. I woke the screen. It was still logged into his email. And there it was, a notification from Summit Ancestry. Subject, confidential test results available. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I clicked the link. It didn't ask for a password because he had saved his login credentials to the browser. He was so arrogant. He was so sure that I was too stupid or too beaten down to look. The portal opened. A PDF file sat there waiting. I opened it. I didn't read the medical jargon. I skipped the graphs and the gene markers. I went straight to the bottom of the page. Probability of paternity 99.99%. Alleged father Ethan J. Hayes, biological mother Ava Brooks. There it was, the smoking gun, the nuclear code. I didn't have time to email it to myself. The timestamps might show I was on his computer. Instead, I pulled out my phone and snapped high-resolution photos of every page of the report, ensuring the date, the names, and the result were perfectly clear. Then I quickly logged into my own secret email on my phone, attached the photos, and hit send. I closed the PDF. I minimized the window so it looked exactly as he had left it. I sprinted back to the stove and stirred the sauce just as the bathroom door opened. Ethan walked back in, looking more relaxed. He walked over to the laptop, refreshed the page, and stared at the screen. I watched his face. I saw his eyes widen. I saw his shoulders drop. He let out a long breath. It was a relief. He wasn't relieved that he wasn't the father. He was relieved that the baby was his, that his legacy was secured. He looked up at me. He looked almost triumphant. Is everything okay? I asked innocently. Yeah, he said, closing the laptop firmly. Yeah, just work stuff. He went to bed early, probably to text Ava the good news. I waited until the house was silent. Then I went downstairs, sat on the cold tile floor of the kitchen, and opened the photos on my phone. I zoomed in on the number, 99 pointing to 99%. Laura had told me that the clause in the prenup was airtight. If he fathered a child, if it was proven by DNA, if I had the evidence, I had it all. I thought I would feel sad. I thought that seeing the concrete proof that my husband had created a life with another woman would break whatever was left of my heart. But as I sat there in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, a strange sound bubbled up in my throat. It started as a huff of air, then a chuckle, and then it erupted into full-blown laughter. I laughed until my ribs ached. I laughed until tears ran down my face. It was not the laughter of joy. It was the laughter of a prisoner who had just found the key in the lock. Vivian Hayes had spent years trying to ensure that no one could steal her family's money. She had written a contract so vicious, so paranoid, that she thought it made her invincible. She never imagined that her own son would be the one to walk into the trap. 99.99%. I wiped my eyes and stood up. Tomorrow was the baby shower. I had a gift table to organize. I had stationery to print. And I had a very special pastel yellow envelope to prepare. Vivian wanted a show. I was going to give her the performance of a lifetime. The war room was not a bunker or a basement. It was a sun-drenched office on the 14th floor of a glass building in downtown Boston, smelling faintly of lemon polish and expensive espresso. Laura Bennett sat across from me. The printed photos of the DNA report spread out on her mahogany desk next to the original prenuptial agreement. She looked like a general surveying a battlefield map. "Okay," she said, tapping her pen against the paper. "Let us review the sequence one more time. It has to be precise, Emily. If we misfire, they will bury us in litigation for the next decade." I nodded, my hands resting in my lap. They were steady now. The shaking had stopped the moment I saw that 99.9% on Ethan's screen. "Step 1, I said, reciting the plan we had built over the last 48 hours. "Public confirmation. We need Ethan and Ava to acknowledge the baby is theirs, and we need the DNA proof to be revealed in a setting where they cannot deny it or hide it." Laura nodded. "Correct. If you just email this to Vivian, she will shred it. She will claim it is a forgery. She will claim you hacked his computer and fabricated the data. She will gaslight you until you question your own sanity. But if 50 people see it, if there is video evidence of their reaction, she cannot spin silence when the whole room is screaming. Step 2, I continued. The moment the paternity is revealed and documented, the infidelity clause triggers. Laura picked up the prenup. Section 8, paragraph C. Proven infidelity resulting in a child. The moment that envelope is opened and verified, you are no longer the discarded wife. You are the primary creditor of the Hayes marriage. You are owed $5,020,000 of his stock options. And step 3, I finished. I file for divorce with leverage. Laura added, her eyes gleaming. We do not just file. We file with the DNA report attached as Exhibit A. We file an affidavit from the baby shower. We crush them before they can even call their crisis PR team. She leaned back, looking at the ceiling. There is one more thing, Emily. One more variable we need to control. What is that? I asked. Edward Hayes, she said, Ethan's father. I hesitated. Edward was a ghost in my marriage. He was cold, distant, and obsessed with business. He barely spoke to me during holidays. He hates social events, I said. He will not come to a baby shower. He thinks they are frivolous. Laura sat up straight. You need to make him come, because Vivian is the gatekeeper. But Edward is the bank. He controls the family trust. He controls the CEO succession plan. Vivian's power comes from her influence over him. If Edward hears about this scandal secondhand, Vivian will spin it. She will tell him you are crazy, that the test was fake, that it is all a misunderstanding. She will protect Ethan. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. But if Edward is in the room, if he sees the DNA report with his own eyes, if he sees his son humiliated and his mistress screaming, he is a man of reputation. He will not forgive the embarrassment. He will cut Ethan off at the knees to save the stock price. And that chaos is exactly what we need to negotiate your exit package. I understood. We weren't just lighting a match. We were inviting the fire marshal to watch the building burn. I picked up my phone. I will get him there, I said. I waited until 2 in the afternoon to call Vivian. I knew she would be at her weekly spa appointment, pliable and eager for validation. Vivian, I said, forcing warmth into my voice. I have been thinking about the venue for Saturday. I know you mentioned the garden at the estate, but do you think that is grand enough? I heard her pause. What do you mean? Well, I said, twirling a pen between my fingers. This is the first grandchild, technically the first heir. If we do it in the backyard, people might think we are hiding something or that we are ashamed. I let the silence stretch. I knew Vivian's greatest fear was looking cheap or embarrassed. You are right, she said slowly. It needs to be a statement. Why not the Willowbrook Country Club? I suggested. The ballroom is free on Saturday afternoon. I checked. If we hold it there, it signals that the Hayes family is proud. It signals legitimacy. I could practically hear her smiling through the phone. That is a brilliant idea, Emily. It is bold. It shows we are unbothered. And Vivian, I added, dropping the final bait, you really should insist Edward comes. Oh, he will not want to, she sighed. You know how he is with parties. I know, I said, but think about the optics. If Ethan is there with his new partner and Edward is not, people will gossip. They will say the patriarch does not approve. They will say there is a rift in the company leadership. But if Edward is there standing next to his son, it presents a united front. It protects the stock. Bullseye? I will make sure he is there, Vivian said firmly, even if I have to drag him. I hung up the phone and looked at Laura. He is coming, I said. Now comes the fun part. The construction of the trap. I spent the rest of the afternoon doing what I did best. I was an event planner. I knew how to create a moment. I knew that the devil was in the details. I went to Willow and Time to use the high-quality printer in the back office. I had already spoken to Rachel, the owner. I told her everything. I told her I might need to pick up more shifts next month, or I might be leaving town with a check for $5 million either way. I needed a safety net. Rachel hugged me and handed me the keys to the office. Burn him to the ground, honey, she had whispered. I opened the file containing the photos of the DNA report. I used Photoshop to clean them up, increasing the contrast so the text was stark and undeniable. I didn't alter the data, that would be illegal, but I made sure the presentation was lethal. I cropped the images to fit on a standard letter-sized page. I used a yellow highlighter function to mark 3 specific lines. Alleged father, Ethan J. Hayes. Biological mother, Ava Brooks. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. I printed it on heavy linen blend paper. It felt official. It felt like a judgment. Then I turned to the packaging. I had a stash of stationery supplies left over from a bridal shower I had designed last month. I chose a pale yellow envelope, the color of innocence, the color of spring. It was non-threatening. It was the kind of envelope you would use for a thank you card or a gift certificate. I slipped the folded report inside. It fit perfectly. I took a neutral gift bag, a simple glossy white bag with rope handles. It was elegant but anonymous. I stuffed it with layers of crisp white tissue paper, creating a nest. I placed the envelope at the very bottom, buried beneath the fluff, so that whoever opened it would have to dig. They would have to work for their destruction. Finally, I made the tag. I used a piece of cream cardstock and wrote on it with my best calligraphy pen. My hand was steady. The ink flowed black and smooth. For the proud parents. No name, no signature, just a simple dedication that would read as sarcasm only in hindsight. I attached the tag to the handle of the bag. It looked innocent. It looked like a gift from a distant aunt or a well-meaning neighbor. It sat on the desk, a white and yellow bomb, waiting for its detonator. There was one last piece of the puzzle, the witness. I needed someone in that room who wasn't on the Hayes payroll. Someone who wouldn't turn the camera away when things got ugly. Someone who would keep recording even if Vivian screamed at them to stop. I found Zoe in the kitchen prepping dough for the morning rush. Zoe was 22, a film student who worked part-time at the cafe. She had piercings in her ears and a deep, abiding hatred for rich people who didn't tip. She also happened to be invisible to people like the Hayeses. To them, she was just labor. "Zoe," I said, "I need a favor, and I need you to be brave." She wiped her hands on a towel. "What do you need, boss?" "I need you to come to a party on Saturday," I said. "I need you to dress like a catering assistant. Black pants, white shirt. I need you to stand in the back of the room, and when they start opening gifts, I need you to record everything." Zoe raised an eyebrow. "Is this for a client?" "No," I said. "It is for me. It is my husband's mistress's baby shower, and I am going to drop a nuclear bomb on them." Zoe's eyes went wide. A slow grin spread across her face. "I will bring my good camera," she said. Saturday morning arrived with a gray, steely sky. I dressed with the precision of an assassin. I chose a navy blue dress, modest, high-necked, professional. I pulled my hair back into a tight bun. I wore pearl earrings. I looked like the perfect submissive, supportive wife. I looked like a woman who knew her place. I drove to the country club with the white gift bag on the passenger seat. I didn't listen to music. I drove in silence, rehearsing the next 3 hours in my head. I would walk in. I would smile. I would hug Vivian. I would shake Edward's hand. I would offer to organize the gift table. I would slip the bag into the pile, and then I would wait. Vivian thought she was building a dynasty today. She thought she was cementing the future of the Hayes line. She was gathering her wealthy friends, her social rivals, and her powerful husband to witness the coronation of her new daughter-in-law. She wanted them to envy the Hayes vitality, the Hayes continuity. She had no idea that she had built the stage for her own execution. I pulled into the parking lot of the Willowbrook Country Club. The valet opened my door. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Hayes," he said. I smiled at him. It was a genuine smile, for the first time in months. "Good afternoon," I said. "It is a beautiful day for a party, isn't it?" I grabbed the white bag. It felt light in my hand. Let the fantasy begin, I thought as I walked up the marble steps. Because in about 2 hours, reality is going to hit them like a freight train. I arrived at the Willowbrook Country Club at 10 in the morning, 2 full hours before the guests were scheduled to arrive. The ballroom was a cavern of silence, smelling of lemon polish and the faint metallic scent of unlit chafing dishes. I moved through the space with the clipboard clutched against my chest, using the hard plastic edge to steady the slight tremor in my hands to the catering staff. I looked like a woman obsessed with perfection. In reality, I was a woman setting the stage for an execution. The room was decorated to an inch of its life. Vivian had spared no expense, using Ethan's credit card to turn the space into a shrine to the Hayes bloodline. There was a balloon arch in shades of cream and gold that cost more than my first car. The dessert table was an architectural marvel, featuring a 3-tiered cake topped with a fondant rattle and cookies iced with the initials BH for Baby Haze. I directed the florists to move the centerpieces 3 inches to the left. I instructed the waitstaff to angle the champagne flutes just so. I was manic, precise, and terrifyingly efficient. I needed to be busy. If I stopped moving, I might vomit, or worse, I might turn around and run. At 11:30, the doors opened and the stars of the show arrived. Ava Brooks walked in first. She was wearing a white body-hugging dress that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. It was the kind of dress a bride would wear to a rehearsal dinner, tight enough to show off the high round curve of her pregnancy. She looked glowing. She looked like a fertility goddess carved out of expensive soap. Her hair was blown out in soft waves, and her skin shimmered with highlighter. Vivian was right behind her, buzzing with nervous energy. When she saw the room, she clapped her hands together. "Oh, Emily," she exclaimed, though her eyes scanned past me to the dessert table. "You have actually done a decent job. It looks very appropriate." Ava waddled over to me, resting a manicured hand on her bump. She gave me a smile that was dripping with pity. It was the smile of a woman who thinks she has won the lottery and is looking at the person who just lost their last dollar. "You did not have to come, Emily," she purred, her voice soft and breathless. "I told Ethan it might be too hard for you, but it is so sweet that you wanted to be here." I looked at her. I looked at the woman carrying my husband's child, standing in the middle of a party I had organized, wearing a dress my husband probably paid for. "I wanted to ensure everything was perfect for the baby," I said, my voice remarkably steady. "After all, family is everything to the Hazes." Vivian swooped in then, hooking her arm through Ava's. "Exactly," she chirped. "And look at you, Ava. You are radiant. Come, stand by the fireplace. The lighting is better." She paraded Ava around the room as the first guests began to trickle in. Vivian introduced her not as Ethan's girlfriend or the woman Ethan is seeing, but with a phrase that made my stomach churn. "This is Ava," Vivian would say, beaming. "The brave young woman giving our family a future." She said it loud enough for me to hear. She said it loud enough for everyone to hear. It was a deliberate erasure of my existence. In one sentence, she reduced me to a dead branch on the family tree and elevated Ava to the root system. She never once acknowledged how that future was conceived. She glossed over the adultery, the lies, the broken vows. In Vivian's world, the ends always justified the means. As long as the ends were a male heir with the Hayes chin, Sophia, Ethan's sister, was hovering nearby like a hummingbird with an iPhone. She was filming content for her social media, capturing slow-motion shots of the mocktails and the cupcakes. She pulled Ava and Vivian into a frame. "Okay, smile," Sophia chirped. Big smiles, captioning this new beginnings, and posted new beginnings. I watched them pose for the camera, constructing a narrative of joy and legitimacy. They were building a castle on a foundation of sand, and they were documenting every brick. Ethan showed up 20 minutes late. He walked in with his phone pressed to his ear, looking important and harassed. He was wearing a charcoal suit, the jacket unbuttoned. He scanned the room, his eyes sliding over me without a flicker of recognition, and landed on Ava. He hung up the phone and walked over to her. He kissed her on the forehead, a tender, possessive gesture that I remembered feeling 1,000 times. "Hey, babe," he said, soft enough for intimacy, but loud enough for the audience. "You look incredible." He turned and finally acknowledged me. His expression shifted instantly. The warmth evaporated, replaced by the cool, detached look he used on junior analysts he was planning to fire. "Thanks for helping with the setup, Emily," he said. "It looks fine. Thanks for helping." Like I was the hired help. Like I was a vendor he would tip at the end of the night if I stayed out of the way. I smiled at him. It was the sharpest smile I had ever worn. "Happy to do it, Ethan," I said. "I think today is going to be very memorable." He didn't catch the double meaning. He was too busy looking at the door as his father walked in. Edward Hayes looked annoyed. He was a man who hated social obligations, especially ones that involved finger sandwiches and balloons. He wore a dark suit and a scowl, but Vivian intercepted him immediately. "Edward," she cried, grabbing his arm. Look at her," she pointed to Ava. "You are going to meet your first grandchild today," she whispered, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. I watched Edward's face soften. The scowl faded. He looked at Ava's stomach, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine interest. The old man was obsessed with legacy. He wanted a successor. He wanted immortality. Vivian had portrayed him perfectly. She had dangled the one thing he couldn't buy, and he was hooked. He walked over to Ava and shook her hand, mumbling something about looking forward to the arrival. Ava beamed, playing the part of the demure, respectful mother-to-be. The trap was set. All the players were on stage. I moved to the gift table. It was my domain. I had arranged it with military precision. The smaller boxes were in the front. The large, showy bags from the socialites were in the middle. And in the back, tucked behind a tower of diaper cakes, was the neutral white bag with the pale yellow envelope. I checked the placement one last time. It had to be last. It had to be the finale. If she opened it too early, the tension wouldn't be high enough. I needed the room to be drunk on the fantasy before I sobered them up with the truth. I caught the eye of Zoe, my friend from the cafe, who was standing near the service entrance, dressed in black slacks and a white button-down. She gave me a nearly imperceptible nod. She had her camera ready. The room filled up. There were about 50 guests, wealthy wives, business partners, friends of Vivian, who treated gossip like currency. They cooed over Ava's bump. They touched her stomach without asking. "Oh, look at that, Carrie," one woman squealed. "That is definitely a boy, a little baby Hayes." Baby Hayes. The name echoed around the room. It was a chant. It was a claim. Vivian soaked it in like oxygen. She was in her element, holding court, accepting congratulations as if she were the one pregnant. She posed for endless photos, her hand resting possessively on Ava's shoulder. She looked at me once across the room and gave me a smug little nod. She thought she had won. She thought she had successfully integrated the mistress and marginalized the wife. At 2, the catering manager signaled that lunch was cleared. It was time. Vivian clapped her hands for attention. The room fell silent. "All right, everyone," she announced, her voice ringing out. "We have one last tradition before we cut the cake. We are going to open the gifts." She gestured to the velvet armchair that had been positioned in the center of the room like a throne. Ava waddled over and sat down, acting shy and overwhelmed. Vivian pulled out her phone. "I want to record this," she declared loudly, "for the baby to look back on one day. We want him to know how much he was loved before he even arrived. She handed her phone to Sophia. Make sure you get a good angle, dear, she instructed. Don't cut off the banners. Ethan, not wanting to be left out of the performance, pulled out his own phone. I will get a backup video, he said, grinning at Ava. For memories. For memories. I stood by the gift table, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. This was it. They were voluntarily setting up the cameras. They were framing the shot. I picked up the first gift, a silver box from Mrs. Whitaker, and handed it to Ava. Here you go, I said, my voice clear and helpful. Let us start with this one. Ava took it, flashing me that pitying smile again. Thanks, Emily. She began to tear the paper. I stepped back, folding my hands in front of me. I looked at the white bag sitting in the back of the pile. It looked so innocent, just paper and tissue, but I knew what was inside. I looked at Edward, watching with a rare smile. I looked at Ethan, holding his phone steady. I looked at Vivian, directing Sophia on where to stand. They were so confident. They were so arrogant. They thought they controlled the narrative. They thought money and audacity could rewrite reality. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive lilies and impending doom. Just wait, I thought. Just wait until you get to the yellow envelope. The spectacle of the gift opening was a masterclass in excess. It felt less like a baby shower and more like a coronation for a prince who had not yet taken his first breath. Ava sat on her velvet throne, tearing through silver paper and silk ribbons, revealing treasure after treasure that cemented her status as the new matriarch of the Hayes dynasty. There were cashmere onesies imported from Paris, soft as clouds and white as snow. There were silver rattles from Tiffany that cost more than my car payments used to be. There was a stroller that looked like it belonged in a sci-fi movie, equipped with suspension systems better than most vehicles on the road. With every gift, the fantasy grew thicker in the air, choking out the reality of how we had all arrived here. And with every gift, Vivian provided the commentary. She stood by Ava's shoulder, beaming at the guests, making sure everyone understood the subtext. "Look at that craftsmanship," she would say, holding up a pair of tiny Italian leather shoes. "Only the best for a Hayes. This child will never lack for anything." She would pause then, turning her head just enough to catch my eye. Her gaze was a weapon. It was gleaming with smug triumph. She was telling me without speaking a single word that I was obsolete. She was telling me that I had failed to provide the one thing that mattered, an heir, and that she had successfully sourced a replacement who could. Then came the blazer. It was the second to last gift. Ava pulled it out of a box wrapped in navy blue paper. It was a tiny, custom-tailored blazer sized for a toddler. She turned it around to show the room. Across the back, embroidered in gold thread, was the name Hayes. The room erupted in coos and applause. "Oh, he is going to look just like his daddy," someone shouted. Ethan beamed, puffing out his chest. He held up his phone, zooming in on the embroidery. He looked so proud. He looked like a man who believed he had gotten away with murder. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to breathe. I looked at the pile. It was gone. Only one bag remained. I walked over to the table and picked up the white gift bag with the rope handles. It felt light in my hand, but I knew it carried the weight of a collapsing empire. I approached Ava. The room quieted down, sensing that this was the finale. "Here is the last one," I said, my voice pleasant and helpful. Ava reached out and took the bag. She frowned slightly as she turned it over in her hands. There was no card attached to the front, no expensive wrapping paper, no brand name stamped on the side. It was just a plain neutral bag. "Who is this from?" she asked, looking up at me. I pointed to the small tag tied to the handle. "There is a note right there," I said. Ava lifted the tag. She read it out loud. "For the proud parents?" She smiled. She thought it was sweet. She thought it was a gesture of anonymity from someone who wanted to be humble. She reached into the bag, pushing aside the layers of crisp white tissue paper. Her hand searched for a box or a toy. Instead, she felt the cool, smooth surface of the envelope. She pulled it out. It was pale yellow, the color of Easter, the color of new beginnings. She slid a manicured fingernail under the flap and tore it open. I took a step back, positioning myself so I could see her face, but also so I was clear of the blast zone. I saw Zoe in the back of the room, her camera held high and steady. The red recording light was a tiny, unblinking eye. Ava pulled out the folded paper. She unfolded it. I watched her eyes. They were confused at first. She was expecting a check. She was expecting a sentimental letter about motherhood. Instead, she saw a logo she didn't recognize, Summit Ancestry. Her eyes dropped to the text. She read the first line, "Alleged father Ethan J. Hayes." She read the second line, "Biological mother Ava Brooks." And then she hit the number. I saw the exact moment the comprehension hit her. The color drained from her face so fast it looked like the blood had been suctioned out of her body. Her skin turned a sickly grayish white. Then, in a rush of adrenaline and panic, a violent red flush crept up her neck. Her hands started to shake. The paper rattled loudly in the silence of the room. She looked at Ethan. She looked at the paper. She looked at her stomach. "No," she whispered. "This isn't." Then she screamed. It was not a scream of surprise. It was a strangled, high-pitched sound of pure terror. It was the sound of a woman who realized the floor had just dropped out from under her feet. She clutched her belly with one hand and crumpled the paper with the other, doubling over as if she had been punched in the gut. The room went dead silent. The cooing stopped. The smiles vanished. Vivian dropped her champagne flute. It shattered on the marble floor. The sound like a gunshot in the quiet room. She rushed forward, her face twisted in panic. "Ava," she cried, reaching for her. "What is it? Is it the baby? Is something wrong?" Ava couldn't speak. She just shoved the crumpled paper at Vivian, her breath coming in short, gasping sobs. Vivian grabbed the paper. She smoothed it out with trembling hands. She adjusted her glasses. She read the header. She read the names. She read the result. 99.99% probability. Vivian froze. She stood there, frozen mid-breath, staring at the document as if it were a death warrant. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked from the paper to me, and her eyes were wide with a dawning, horrifying realization. She realized she wasn't looking at a gift. She was looking at the evidence she had tried to suppress. Ethan, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, stepped forward. "What is going on?" he demanded, his voice rising in panic. "What is that?" He tried to snatch the paper from his mother's hand. "Give me that." But he wasn't fast enough. Edward Hayes moved. For an older man, he was incredibly quick. He stepped between Ethan and Vivian, his face dark with suspicion. He grabbed the paper from Vivian's limp fingers before Ethan could touch it. He held it up. He didn't need glasses to read the highlighted text. Alleged father Ethan J. Hayes. Probability of paternity. 99.99%. Edward's face turned the color of stone. He looked at the date. He looked at the lab logo. He looked at his son. "Is this true?" Edward asked. His voice was low, but it carried to every corner of the room. Ethan's face crumbled. He started babbling, his hands waving in the air. "Dad, wait. It isn't what it looks like. That is fake. Emily must have forged it. She is crazy. You know she is jealous." Edward didn't look at Emily. He looked at the lab report. He looked at the authenticity stamp. "It has a digital verification code, Ethan," Edward said, his voice icy. "This is a certified legal document. You told me this was a rumor. You told me you were handling a stalker." Ava was sobbing now, loud heaving sounds that echoed off the high ceilings. "You promised," she screamed at Ethan. "You promised me we were safe. You said you would take care of it." The guests began to murmur. The sound started as a low buzz and quickly grew into a roar of whispers. Phones were raised. People were recording. They weren't recording the happy couple anymore. They were recording the train wreck. Zoe zoomed in. I knew she was catching every second of it. She caught Vivian's horror as she realized her social standing was disintegrating. She caught Ava's meltdown as she realized her golden ticket had just become a liability. And she caught Ethan's panic as he realized his father was looking at him not as a son, but as a risk. I stood up from my chair. I smoothed my dress. I picked up the manila folder I had placed under my seat. I walked to the front of the room, moving through the shockwaves like a ghost. "Relax, everyone," I said. My voice was calm. It was the only steady thing in the room. The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye turned to me. "There is no need to panic," I continued, looking out at the sea of stunned faces. "It is just the confirmation you all were waiting for. You wanted a Hayes heir, didn't you?" I gestured to the crumpled paper in Edward's hand. "Well, there it is. That is the proof that my husband's affair produced a real, legally provable baby." I walked over to the table where Ethan was standing. He looked at me with pure hatred. But behind the hate, there was fear. He looked small. "Emily, shut up," he hissed. "We will talk about this at home." "We are not going home, Ethan," I said pleasantly. I opened my folder. I pulled out a copy of the prenuptial agreement. I held it up so Edward could see it. "I think your father remembers this document," I said. Vivian insisted on it. Specifically, Section 8, Paragraph C, the infidelity clause. Vivian let out a small, strangled noise. She put a hand to her throat. I turned to the guests, addressing them as if I were giving a toast. You see, Vivian was very worried about gold diggers. So she wrote a clause that said, if a child was born from an affair and paternity was proven by DNA, the wife, that is me, gets an immediate cash settlement and 20% of the husband's stock options. I looked at Ethan. The moment Ava opened that envelope, you didn't just become a father, Ethan. You became my biggest investor. I dropped the folder onto the gift table right next to the silver rattle from Tiffany. Ava screamed again, a sound of pure rage this time. Realizing she had been played, Ethan looked like he was going to be sick. Edward looked at the prenup, then at his son with an expression of absolute disgust. I smiled at the camera one last time. Enjoy the cake, everyone, I said. I hear it is lemon. I stood at the front of the room, watching the chaos ripple through the crowd like a shock wave. The silence that had followed my initial announcement had broken, replaced by a low, frantic murmuring. Vivian was clutching the edge of the dessert table as if it were a life raft. Ethan looked like he was trying to solve a calculus equation in a language he did not speak. Ava was still weeping, a raw, ugly sound that clashed horribly with the elegant classical music still playing softly over the speakers. I held up the folder again. I did not shout. I did not need to. When you hold the deed to someone's destruction, you can whisper. For those of you who are confused, I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room where Zoe was zooming in on Ethan's face. Allow me to clarify the legal standing of the Hayes family as of this moment. I walked over to Edward Hayes. He was the only one standing perfectly still. He looked at me not with anger, but with a cold, assessing calculation. He was a businessman, and he knew a hostile takeover when he saw one. I pulled a document from the folder. It was a photocopy of the prenuptial agreement with Section 8, Paragraph C, highlighted in neon yellow. Vivian insisted on this clause 5 years ago, I told Edward, handing him the paper. She was terrified that I, the waitress from the cafe, would try to pin a stranger's baby on her son. She wanted to ensure that the Hayes bloodline remained pure. So she wrote a penalty into the contract. I turned to look at Vivian, whose face was a mask of gray ash. If Ethan fathers a child outside of our marriage, and that paternity is proven by DNA evidence, the contract states that the infidelity is no longer a civil matter. It becomes a breach of financial fiduciary duty. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. That means, I continued, looking directly at Ethan, that as of 5 minutes ago, when Ava opened that envelope and confirmed paternity in front of 50 witnesses, I became entitled to an immediate lump sum settlement of $5 million. A gasp went through the room. $5 million. It was a number that even these wealthy socialites respected. But that is not all, I added, enjoying the way Ethan flinched. The clause also grants me 20% of Ethan's vested stock options in Hayes Capital Ventures. I handed a second document to Edward. It was a printout of the time-stamped email from Ethan's computer, the one showing he had accessed the DNA results days ago. And as you can see here, Edward, your son knew. He received the results on Thursday. He knew this baby was his, and he still let Vivian organize this party. He let you walk into this room. He tried to string both me and Ava along, hoping he could buy her silence with a rental apartment and buy my ignorance with a smile. Edward took the paper. He stared at the timestamp. He stared at the login credentials. He looked at Ethan. The look was terrifying. It was devoid of love. It was the look a CEO gives to a liability. You knew, Edward asked. His voice was a low rumble, like thunder before a storm. You knew the results, and you let your mother throw a pageant. You let me come here and shake hands with people while you were sitting on a scandal that could tank our stock price. Dad, please, Ethan stammered, sweat dripping down his temple. I was handling it. I was going to tell you. I just needed time to structure the... You were handling nothing, Edward roared. He threw the papers onto the floor. You were playing house with a mistress while your wife was outmaneuvering you in your own home. Edward straightened his jacket. He addressed the room, his voice booming. I apologize to our guests for this display. It seems my son has forgotten the values this family stands on. He turned to Ethan. Effective immediately, You are stepping back from your role as Executive Vice President of Hayes Capital, pending a full review of your judgment and your finances. You are suspended and do not expect the trust fund to bail you out of this settlement. If you owe your wife $5 million, you will find a way to pay it, or you will sell your assets. I am not financing your stupidity. Ava stopped crying. She looked up, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. She looked at Ethan, who was now slumped against the wall, stripped of his title and his safety net. "Wait," she rasped. "What does that mean? Suspended?" "It means," I said, stepping in to answer her, "that the man you thought was your golden ticket is currently unemployed, and the money he promised you, penthouse life, the endless shopping sprees," I gestured to the room, "that money is going to me, Ava, to pay for the breach of contract." Ava stood up. She looked at Ethan with pure venom. The illusion of love evaporated instantly, replaced by the cold, hard reality of economics. "You told me you ran the company," she screamed at him. "You told me you were untouchable. You promised me a good life, Ethan." "I promised you," Ethan snapped, his own temper fraying. "You were the one who got pregnant on purpose. You trapped me." The guests gasped again. It was a soap opera come to life. Vivian, realizing that her entire world was collapsing, lunged at me. She didn't hit me, but she got close enough for me to smell her fear. "You did this," she hissed, her eyes wild. "You planned this whole thing. You invited Edward. You set up the gift table. You are evil, Emily. You are destroying this family." I looked at her. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just the cool, clean sensation of a job finished. I pointed at Ava, who was shouting at Ethan. I pointed at the crumpled DNA report on the floor. I pointed at Edward, who was already on his phone calling his lawyers. "I didn't destroy anything, Vivian," I said calmly. The rot was already there. I just turned on the lights. I reached into my bag and pulled out one last envelope. This one was white. I handed it to her. "I filed for divorce at 9 this morning," I said. "This report is attached to the filing. My lawyer is expecting your call." I turned away from her. I walked over to the table where I had left my clipboard. Out of habit, I checked the list. Gift table done. Reveal done. Exit pending. I picked up my pen and checked the final box. Some of the guests were already slinking toward the door, desperate to escape the blast radius. Others, the ones with less shame, were openly filming. Mrs. Whitaker was holding her phone up, capturing Vivian as she tried to grab devices out of people's hands. "Please," Vivian was shouting, her voice shrill and desperate. "Respect the family's privacy. Put that away. This is a private event," but it was too late. The internet is forever, and Zoe had been streaming for 10 minutes. I walked toward the exit. I passed Ava, who was now crying into her hands, realizing she had tied herself legally and biologically to a sinking ship while the wife she betrayed walked away with the lifeboats. I passed Ethan. He didn't look at me. He was staring at the floor, defeated. I walked past the catering staff. The manager, a nice man named Michael, looked stunned. "Thank you for your hard work today, Michael," I said politely. "The balloon arch was beautiful." He just nodded, mouth slightly open. I walked out of the double doors, down the marble steps, and into the cool afternoon air. The sun was still shining, the birds were still singing. The world had not ended, it had just corrected itself. I walked to my car, a sensible sedan that I would be trading in next week. I sat in the driver's seat and closed the door. The silence was heavy and sweet. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that felt cleaner than it had in 5 years. I pulled out my phone. I had one text to send. When it was done, I typed, "Laura, everyone knows." Edward cut him off. "Vivian is losing her mind." The reply came 3 bubbles later. "Congratulations, Emily. Now we just finished the paperwork. Go buy yourself some champagne." I put the phone down. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. I didn't see the tired, beaten-down girl from the cafe anymore. I saw a woman who had walked into a lion's den wearing a meat dress and walked out wearing a fur coat. I started the engine. I didn't look back at the country club. I didn't look back at the Hayes family. I shifted into drive and pulled away, leaving the ruins of their reputation in my rearview mirror. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you felt even 1 ounce of satisfaction when Ava opened that envelope, you know what to do. Hit like, subscribe to Violet Revenge Stories, and tell me in the comments, would you have walked away with the money like Emily? Or burned the whole Hayes empire to the ground instead? Also, please tell me where you are listening from so we can connect. And do not forget to press the hype button so this story can reach even more